Hello, how are you? My name is Bill Costanzo. I'm a psychologist, uh, psychologist of many kinds. I do social psychology and clinical psychology, and I study how children grow up. I do all of those things. I study teenagers and young teens like you guys. And what I want to talk with you about today is social behavior and social psychology. Um, and what do you think social psychologists study? What do you think? What would you guess that social psychologists study?
Um, Social psychology?
Yeah, what would we study?
Uh, what like when people are in a group, how they react to each other, depending on like how long they've known each other and what's going on.
That's a good thing. They also study how we react to social stimuli, social things around us, that are there and present, but even those that are in our head. So you have friends that you don't see for a long time, but they're still inside your head a bit, what they look like, what they believe, and you may even feel like you need to be like your friends even when you're not with them, if you know what I mean. You get that? So social psychology tries to study not only how we behave socially every day, but how we think socially and how we take inside of us the people that we live with and are important to us, including our peers, parents, all of us. And there are a lot of important topics. I mean, like social psychologists study how we fall in love. They study why we follow the people we do. They study where our attitudes come from and what our beliefs are and why they stay that way, even though people give us facts to tell us something different. So all of those things, studying social psychology is as old as the human race. Philosophers back in Greek times and probably cavemen and cavewomen studied it too. They wanted to know why somebody was being mean to them and whether or not it was because they were a bad person or because they lived in a bad situation. So that's social psychologists study the situation that affects behavior. And then there are personality psychologists who study individual differences. Like are you different than your brother, Dave? Are you different than your brother?
Yes.
Okay. And so you have individual differences, but you know what? If I put you in an extreme situation together, you would behave more and more like one another. Okay, so sometimes the situation determines what you do, and social psychologists try to define that situation. They also study things that we think are pretty clear. So, for example, do you think it's true that absence makes the heart grow fonder? What do you think it means, and do you think it's true?
Well, like when people are away from others,
Mm-hmm.
they miss them more.
Yeah. Do you think that's true?
Maybe.
Yeah.
It would probably depend on how well you know someone. Like if you just met someone and said hi to someone on the street and you never found them again, you probably would miss them.
That's a good point. You're thinking like a social psychologist, because there's another saying that is out of sight, out of mind. And what does that mean?
If you don't
can't
see them, they're gone.
Yeah.
Right. So people have social psychological theories, but what social psychologists try to do is figure out when the first statement is true versus when the second statement is true. So they'll do research to figure out if there are situations or types of relationship where absence makes the heart grow fonder, or when you say, too bad, bye-bye, I don't care about you anymore. So both things are true. They're truisms. They're not really true completely. And social psychologists try to study when one is true and when the other is true. Real beginning of social psychology was around the start of the 20th century. And although it's disputed, people say that it began with this guy Triplett, who did this study because he observed people who rode in bicycle races. And he realized that when people rode the race alone, they were racing the clock, they went slower than they were when they were racing another person. And he called this social facilitation. So if other people are doing things that you're doing, you tend to increase your performance because they're there. Okay,
Hear it. It sounds so true.
yeah,
Information.
you're sensitive to other people that way. That was the first, it was called social facilitation. What he did then is he went in his laboratory and he took kids and he had them with fishing rods and he had them reeling their fishing rod alone or with others. And he found out when they were reeling in fish, and they were really fishing, when they were reeling in fish on the dock, that they went faster when others were also reeling things in. And they didn't even know they were going faster than when they were alone. Okay, so that was the first, that's often stated as the first experiment, although some people think there were experiments before that. Social facilitation, and it gives you an example of how being around other people changes our behavior, and even thinking about other people changes our behavior. So do you think your behavior changes when you're with others and when you're not with others? Do you think that's true? And does it matter who those others are?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You behave differently when you're with your parents than when you're with your best friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do, huh? Okay. Do your parents know that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, they think you're always who you are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the study of thinking and beliefs and behaviors really picked up after World War II, that it really picked up then, because many of the scholars who became very curious about individuals who were trying to understand the events of World War II, especially the Holocaust. And a lot of the early social psychologists in that mid-century, mid-20th century period were people who had some connection to the Holocaust, and it led them to study the indirect connections, what a human being is like. How could they bring about something so terrible? Are they bad? Are we bad in our souls? Are we bad people? Or are there reasons why people did what they did in those times? How is it that ordinary people, just ordinary folks, could do such mean things to other folks and then go home and eat breakfast with their kids the next day? So social psychologists were concerned with that, and they wanted to know how that happened and how could somebody with beliefs behave in ways that don't follow those beliefs? And they wanted to know whether it was, well, maybe it's because those people who did those things were a particular nationality, and maybe people in that nationality, in that case it was German, had this tendency to hurt other people. But we quickly found that it wasn't a matter of nationality, it was a matter of situation. And that's what I want to start with in terms of why it is that we don't always act on our attitudes. You have attitudes, but you don't always act on your attitudes. What food do you hate?
What food?
What food do you hate?
Cilantro.
Cilantro. So do you ever have to have a dish and do you have to eat cilantro? If your friend said you have to try my new recipe with cilantro, would you try it?
It depends. If it's like a soup with cilantro on top, then sure, I'll eat it. If it's like salsa with cilantro, I'll eat it. But if it's like
just a leaf
cilantro with like salt, no way.
Okay, but what you don't always behave like your attitude is. You sometimes do things that social psychologists would call counter-attitudinal, right? You behave in ways that are different than what you believe, okay? So what is an attitude? Can you tell me what an attitude is?
A way of thinking about something. Like, I think that cilantro is absolutely disgusting and tastes like soap.
Yeah. What do you think, Daisy?
Yeah.
You like
Yeah.
Okay, so you have different attitudes towards cilantro. I bet you also have different attitudes toward different people that you know. You may like one of your friends better than Eli likes his friends, okay? So that likes your friends. That's a possibility, right? So you can hold an individual attitude about something. But you know what? Social psychologists use attitudes because they realized that they had this definition that was an attitude is a predisposition to act. Okay, so if I don't like cilantro, I won't eat it. Okay, that if I don't like a person, I'll not interact with them, right? I won't get in the same room with them if I really don't like them. So the assumption is that an attitude is a predisposition to act in a particular way. Problem is, we don't always follow our attitudes. And so we had to figure out why. And one of the things that came up is, think of the letter F, okay? That there are 3 F's in an attitude, even though you don't spell it that way. The first F is a fact. It's a fact. It may not be a real fact, but it sounds like a fact. Maybe we should call it a factoid, something that's like a fact. Like orange juice prevents the common cold. Let's say that's a fact. People believe that orange juice is good to keep you healthy. And then the second F is a feeling. The feeling would be, I like orange juice. That's the feeling, you know? And then there's a following. All my friends like orange juice. Or somebody I think highly of likes orange juice. That's how advertisers get us to buy orange juice. They show us Michael Jordan drinking orange juice. Or, you know, they show us some other person that, you know, I don't know, Justin Bieber drinking orange juice to sell the orange juice. Because what they're doing is when you change an attitude, you use one of those F's. You either try to change the fact, you either try to change the feeling, or you try to change the following. And one of those things will change one of the other parts of your attitude. So if you think of your attitudes, the people you like or the people you don't like, there are facts that you have about them. That's a nice person, okay? And I like that person. And so do all my friends like that person. That's your attitude toward that individual, has those 3 parts. Now, the thing is that we're very dishonest with ourselves. All of us are a lot of the time. So we try to justify the things we do by changing one of these things. So if we behave differently than we believe the facts show, then we might change what we think the fact is, okay? Or if we start disliking cilantro or liking it, then we change the way we behave, okay? And we try to seek out people that agree with us. Now, people have labeled things like this confirmation bias or self-justification. So confirmation bias is when you are so sure you're right. You want to really hold on to your attitude. You're so sure you're right that you seek all the information you can to confirm your opinion, okay? And you
ignore all the other information.
Yeah, you ignore the other information, you know, so you collect biased information that really favors your attitude. And it can favor your fact, it could favor your feeling, it can favor your following, it could be all. You could say, I believe that because my best friend believes it, or the group I hang around with believes it. My mother used to tell me when I was growing up, when I would say, but all my friends do this, she would say, if all your friends were going to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge, would you jump off the Brooklyn Bridge? So it wasn't a good excuse for her that all my friends did it, but it led me to feel like I needed to find information to confirm what I believed myself, okay? And so our attitudes are always up for grabs, and we're always trying to confirm them whenever we can. So much research is involved with changing these 3 F's, okay? The attitudes we have may not seem rational. Sometimes the rationale for behaving in ways leads us to deny facts, okay? Sometimes we have, in certain countries, we might have presidents who do that, I don't know. They deny facts in order to believe a particular way. And we consider that to be lying. But it's not really lying in a sense, it is. They'll always claim there are alternative facts. There are different factoids you could believe. Now, do you feel badly if you do things that are different than your friend? I ask you to do this exercise, and I understand that you don't want to say anything about your friends, and that makes sense to me. And that's good. because you're loyal. It's another social psychological concept. So tell me, why do you think there's so much pressure to be like other people? Why do you think that happens?
Well, because if everybody in the world is going to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge, you'll be like, well, all your friends are doing it and your parents are doing it. You'll be like, well, I look up to these people.
Yeah.
If they're all doing it, it can't be that bad. And
Yeah.
you jump off the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah, okay. So for a lot of years, people thought that our attitudes were they were making us behave in particular, the predisposition to act, they were making us behave a particular way. But this guy came along, social psychologist by the name of Darrell Bem, and he said, no, sometimes our attitudes are framed, or they happen, because we behave a particular way a lot. So we don't eat spinach because we like it. We like spinach because we eat it. So if I want to get you to like things, I can get you to behave in a particular way. Now that can get really dicey because people who can get you to do things, even if they're not your attitude, they don't agree with your attitude, can get you to change your attitude by getting you to behave. And there was an early theory that was called cognitive dissonance. That's where confirmation bias actually came from, that whole idea. An early theory which said that if you behave in ways that are different than your attitude, that you get all discombobulated. You try to keep everything in your life consistent. So if you're nasty to a good friend that you like, you feel bad. Not only because you've been nasty, but because you're not acting on the basis of what you feel. You remember our 3 F's. So you're not acting on the basis of what you feel. When that's inconsistent, that gives you a sense of what's called dissonance, or feeling like things don't fit together. And that creates a motivation to make them fit together. So one way we can make them fit together is say, my good friend that I'm acting nasty to was really nasty to me, and I'm just going back at that. So there's a good reason for me doing it. Now, one of the first studies that was ever done to look at that, and you should look at, so I've tried to be so I want you to understand what really happens in social psychology, and a lot of it is research, and I'll tell you where the theories lead to this research. So one of the first studies that's really interesting was done by a fellow by the name of Festinger, who did cognitive dissonance research. And what he did was he got college students to come into a laboratory. And in that laboratory, he had them do a task, really boring task, even more boring than me talking to you, but a really boring task. What they had to do was a tray was brought in of bottles, and full of bottles, like 50 bottles. And what the individual had to do was just turn the bottles one at a time on that tray and do that for like 40 minutes. And a new tray got brought, and do it again, okay? Then the experimenter, social psychology uses very dishonest experiments sometimes. So the experimenter says to the guy who's the subject, or the woman who's the subject, listen, I need your help. My assistant didn't show up today. So what I need you to do, I'm running this study where I'm trying to find out if people who anticipate something good will like it better than people who anticipate that something is boring. So I'd like you to tell my next subject to be my assistant and tell them this is a really interesting thing. Okay, so I want you to lie to the next subject, okay? And I'm going to ask you what you think the results of this study were, and that's what he did. And he gave, and this was a long time ago, so it was a lot of money. He gave the subject either $1 or $10 for telling the lie. Okay, but so they sat there, and new subjects came in, and they would say, this is really the most interesting task in the world. This is fantastic. You'll really enjoy yourself. And the individual comes in, and then after the whole thing is over, the person who lies, the person who's the fake assistant, the person who lies is asked how much he likes the task. Okay, who do you think liked it more? The guy who got $10 or the guy who got $1?
$10.
Okay, what do you think?
$1.
Yeah, it's the $1 that's right, because what cognitive dissonance says is that when you do something, like if my belief is I should tell people the truth or I shouldn't lie to people, and I lie to people, the less money I get for it, the more I think I really didn't tell a lie, the more I can distort or bias my idea of what I did. So that's what he found. He found that and at the time, nobody believed that would happen. They believed that, what Daisy thought, that because reinforcement theory would say that, but what happened was the less money they got, the more they liked the task. They said they liked the task. And I think that the theory was that was a way they can justify their behavior. So we do a lot of justifying of our own behavior. Okay, we really do that. And even when we conform to peers, we could change our attitudes by behaving like them and say, we really like this music, even though we hate it, if all our peers like it. And the less I get for doing that, so if somebody says, I'll give you $100 to say that you like this kind of music, you have a good reason for saying you like the music, maybe. But if I give you very little and you say you like it, then it must be because you really like it. That's how we reason. We justify our behavior. Okay, so that's one of the reason that's so important is because there's a lot of theory in social psychology that say we walk around the world trying to balance everything. We try to balance what we believe with what we do. We try to balance what we do with how we feel. We try to put all of those things in balance with one another. When they're out of balance, then in fact we have to make a cognitive adjustment in our thoughts to put things back in balance. And whenever we do that, we can create a false reality. We can create a reality that isn't really true, but it makes me feel good at the moment. And a lot of things happen socially because we do that. A lot of the reasons we can keep on agreeing with groups, serious things. When I told you about social psychologists going about, studying why something like the Holocaust would happen, those individuals, what they found was that if you have to do something day after day after day, and you begin by not really thinking that that's a good thing to do. If you keep doing it, if somebody is able to induce you to do it and give you not lots of reward, but the reasons for doing it are very, subtle. They're not very big. You're going to come to say this is the right thing to do. So one needs to be cautious about what you do, because if you keep doing something over and over again, it's going to affect what you believe and what your attitudes happen to be. So it affects your own sense of being authentic. Now, what do you think a stereotype is? Do you know what a stereotype is?
Stereotype is I think it's like when you're like over exaggerating because you get this one tiny piece of information, and then you say it with everyone who's like that.
Yeah.
The one tiny piece of information.
Yeah, it's like,
That's good. You should teach this next class. Eli, what do you think a stereotype is?
it's like, it's a bias that you like expand to make it like, instead, like this person is, like someone says this person is weird, and you like, yeah, I agree, and then they say a couple other people are weird, and you notice a similarity. Let's say they all have glasses, then you'll start thinking everybody with glasses is weird.
That's absolutely right. That's great. That both of you are right, and both of you have it right on the nose. That the stereotype begins with the factoid. There's a sort of kernel of truth. Okay, it's you observe a behavior, and it's not the problem to say that I don't know, Italians are temperamental. That would be, I'm an Italian, so I think about things like that. Italians are temperamental. Sometimes they are, that's true. Some Italians are. Maybe more Italians are than aren't. That's a possibility. But the problem with the stereotype is you take a group description and apply it to every individual in the group. And you assume that every individual has that characteristic. And that's very important with regard to things having to do with race and ethnicity and all ethnic groups and this kind of thing, because we tend to develop pictures of them that expand from what we think a group concept is to an individual concept, and then apply it to everybody. So this is one way in which our thoughts are distorted. And why do we do that? Why do you think we do that? Why do we stereotype? Is it because we're bad people or biased people? Why do you think we stereotype?
Do you want to go?
It's because we hear something and it just seems right.
Yeah.
Considering the circumstances. Like, yeah, it just seems right.
I guess it might be like this one person who is down and their category is like whatever is maybe right, and you are convinced it's right, but then there's this other person and you're like, yeah, that's kind of right.
Yeah.
So everyone in that group.
Exactly. And one of the reasons that's true, and one of the rules in social psychology that comes out of the research that you learn, is that we live in a pretty complicated world, right? There are lots of people out there. There are lots of personalities. There are lots of things that people do. And what we do and why we have all these cognitive strategies is that we're never going to understand the world. So we create these economies, these very simpler ways to understand a complex world. And one way to do that is to group people, to basically, I don't have to understand every person. I can understand, this person's a male or this person's a female, and that's what they do. And I don't have to understand every male and every female. I attribute characteristics to them. The problem is a lot of those characteristics are biased, right? Isn't that? Yeah. So, and sometimes we apply them to ourselves. We self-stereotype, that like, I'm a boy, I should like sports. I'm a girl, I should, like to really have kittens and pet them and be nice to them and be kind. So we self-stereotype, and that sometimes stops us from being the things we want to be. And one of the reasons I study kids your age is I try to understand how they see their futures, how they see their identity in the future, becoming who they want to be, and how these little economies may stop them from being those things. And that could happen. Stereotypes are examples. We started out with attitudes of big attitudes. They cover a lot of people. And so I could say, I don't like people who come from Peru, I have this opinion toward African Americans that leads me to behave similarly to each of them. That's a big attitude. It's an attitude that drives a lot of my behavior, and it's based on biases. And I go around and keep that attitude by confirming it. So I find a person of that particular race or ethnicity or gender, I see what they're doing, and I say, see that? It fits my stereotype. And so I try to make everything consistent with my stereotype, and that allows me to keep. And the only way to break those things down is to have more contact with people of different kinds of people, so I don't use stereotypes. So tell me, in your social groups, are there people who are leaders and people who are not leaders? Are there differences between them? Do you have a network of people that people more liked than less liked?
I think
I'm not
that
asking you who they are. Just do you have a structure in your group of? So are there people that are really liked and people that are less liked?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
I would say that all the people who play sports at recess a lot are usually, like, we have like a couple boys in our class, and I'm not one of them, but they're usually like always playing sports every recess, and I'm usually just like playing tag with everybody.
Yeah. So
Usually We actually have like half of our class is playing tag and like 5 people who play sports. And even though there's less people who play sports, the sports people are more popular than the tag people. It's weird.
Uh-huh. Now, are smart people more popular than less smart people who do better academically? Are they liked better than people who don't? You said sports.
Well, if people need help, then they might be.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess smart people are just doing their thing, so they're kind of ignored, I guess.
I see. Okay. Yeah, so that what I'm trying to convey is you probably have a network where people connect to one another. People form groups that are different, little cliques. So you have friends, Daisy, you have friends, Eli. I'm using your screen names. You have friends and you collect together and you're different than another group.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those liking bonds are very important because what we tend to do is that we justify not only our own behavior, but the behavior of people close to us that we like. And we tend to, for confirmation purposes, people we don't like so much or in another group, we tend to not justify their behavior. We tend to see it as part of their personality when they behave badly. We don't explain it. So that happens a lot. Very frequently, but one of the things I can tell you that the research shows, and you're not going to like this, Eli, is that girls are better at accepting responsibility. Oh, yeah. Girls, when girls fail at something, they tend to be more likely to say, I did it because of me. When they fail at something, they're more likely to say, I did it because the test was hard or I was unlucky. Now, that's not always true, so I don't want to use a stereotype, but what had happened, when you have those kinds of beliefs, it could, if you think it's always because of you and it's not always because of you, it could limit, what you think you can do. You could have lower views of what you think of yourself. And boys could have a more inflated view of what they think about themselves. This goes to men, and as I said, it doesn't apply to everybody, but it shows that there are certain characteristics because of social norms and beliefs that get us to think of ourselves in ways that might either limit us or enhance our ability to change ourselves. So that's another way that we look at. So social psychologists are constantly looking at ways we think about others and think about the self and how that affects our behavior. So I do want to try, I can't now because can you have a little picture of me or a big picture?
Medium.
Medium. Because I wanted to show you something and I want to see if you can see it because I wanted to see if I want to do an experiment with you. People tell you the study of conformity and people going along with attitudes of other people and beliefs of other people, even when they were totally wrong, was studied by a person by the name of Solomon Asch. And he was one of these people that did come from Germany and did come after the Holocaust. And he did this study. He got 8 people in a room. He talked to 7 people in advance, and he told them, hey, look, you be my Confederate, and when I show you these stimuli, when I show you these pictures, I want you to answer the following way. And he showed them 20 trials of judging lines. And on 12 of the trials, it was very easy, and they chose the right option, and I'm going to show you those trials. On 8 of the trials, they chose the wrong option. And those 7 people, one after the other, chose the wrong option, and you are number 8. And you're standing there, and there's a majority of your peers who are choosing the wrong line as the right line. What do you say? I'll show you those lines to show you. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so on one side, you've got a line, and then you got 3 lines. And what you need to do is match one of the lines on the left to the lines on the right, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you pick one, and you can see what the right one is, can't you?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, on 8 trials, the other 7 people said very confidently that the shortest line was the right line in those trials. They chose the wrong one, and the majority, therefore, was coming up with a false perception. And what Ash found was 30% of the time, and individuals judged wrongly. As easy as these things were, they judged wrongly. So it's a very, that's conformity. Okay, that's what conformity is like. Do you ever experience something like that in your own world?
I think I might have.
Yeah,
Probably.
I probably have.
Yeah, that's what I had asked Leslie to sort of get you to consider.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, we have some.
So a couple of people in my class have like a phone,
Huh?
and a couple of people in my class have a phone,
Yeah.
and one of the and the first thing, like one of the first things I came up with was like, I asked my mom and dad a lot for a phone,
Uh-huh.
a lot.
Yeah.
Like I was just like as soon as possible, like we were just sitting down, and I remembered, oh, my friend was texting in the morning before class today. Mom, Dad, can I have a phone? And of course they said no because I'm like, we're too young to have a phone. Wah, wah, wah.
Uh-huh.
And then I just always wanted to have one. I probably wouldn't want to have one if all my friends didn't have one.
Yeah. Did you tell your mother and father that all your friends had one?
Yep.
That's like my Brooklyn
Always
Bridge
the first
thing.
thing I said.
Yeah. And what about you, Daisy?
I think trends are a really hard thing for everyone. Me,
Uh-huh.
I don't like trends. But for others, like it might be really hard because everyone's like, ooh, I'm gonna do this super trendy thing.
Mhm.
And this person's like, oh my gosh, all my friends are doing it. I don't personally like it, but my friends, which are now more important than what I care about.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that happens when you're developing, particularly at your age, I did research my thesis when I was in graduate school, and then I followed it up many years after that. I could never figure out everything about it. Is I was looking at whether or not kids did this thing with the lines or conformed or wanted to do what the majority did. As they grew older, when did they want to do that the most? And I found out it was kids between the age of 11 and 13 that conformed the most. I published this thing a long time ago. And what you found out when I was running this study, it was run a little bit differently than getting 7 people to tell something untrue. I put them in booths and I gave them numbers and I faked the first 4 people. I said, these 4 people went this way. What do you think about these figures, these judgments? Like I showed you lines, I used other figures. And when I did it with the 6 and 7-year-olds, the minute I gave these 4 wrong responses, they screamed out, "Let me go first," by saying that all these people are really wacky. They're picking the wrong line. But when I got to the 11 and 13-year-olds, about 50% of the time, 60% of the time actually, they went along with the majority on those judgments. So when we develop, it becomes more and more important for us to be like our friends. Now, my 16-year-olds stopped doing that so much. They behave like adults. They did it about 30% of the time, my 17. But between ages 11 and 13 become very important. And one of the things I should probably end with is why social behavior becomes so important is that it wraps up our identity. And what happens at 11 to 13 is what we feel we are, what our identity is. So if I ask Daisy and Eli, your fake names, if I asked you what you're really like, describe yourself to me, you would have a description. Will you have a description of yourself?
Probably.
Probably. Would you say, smart and moody, or what would you say about it?
I'd probably say I'm tired.
I'd probably say
Well,
I'm pretty smart
But you would also say, I'm a boy, right? And I'm a girl. If I asked you to describe yourself, to tell me as many things about you as you could, you'd tell me what your gender was. You might tell me your race. You might tell me that you're a fifth grader or a sixth grader or whatever. You might tell me that I like basketball, or you might tell me any number of things. So that would be your identity. What happens when we're 11 to 13 is that we tend to confuse what our identity is, what our personal identity is, with what our social identity is. So how we appear to others. So we think of ourselves like our good friends think of us. And we tend to merge those things together so that we don't act like our good friends, we feel less like ourselves. And that explains one of the reasons why there's so much conformity at that age. We're struggling with becoming something, and I know this is complex. I'm trying to make it simpler, but it's really a very important basis for our behavior. But even when we become adults, even your mom and dad, when you become adults, you struggle with those identity questions, okay? You struggle with, who am I really? And am I like my good friends? Am I different than them? And how I feel about myself becomes important. So in the end, I tried to take you through an entire semester of social psychology, from attitudes to self-perception to stereotyping. I know that I could bore people because I did it a lot when I taught in college. So I just want to be sure that you're okay with it. And I hope you want to study more social psychology in the future.
Probably.
You want to,
I will. Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed talking with you. I hope you found it useful, and enjoy your times of isolation. Okay?
You too.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye.